main thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Just Win podcast. That's Tashan Reed. That's Vic Tafur. They were both at the Raiders facility for the electrifying press conference introducing new GM John Spytek and Pete Carroll. And if for the guys who are watching this live, you won't see it on the podcast, but we did replace our great producer, Neil, did replace the image of AP with Pete Carroll. We're still working on the audio. We were waiting for today so we get a good quote, but that will be replaced. We're transitioning into a new Raiders era, as Vic Tafur said. How you guys doing?
Good, man. They fed us well. Got some lunch after the press conference. I'm feeling great. But Pete Carroll had a lot of energy, fired up. John Spytek's a pretty chill guy in comparison, but they're clearly on the same page. They both love football and they're fired up and ready to get rolling.
Yeah, you would never know that Pete's 73. I mean, it came up today, but the energy is really high and the enthusiasm, and he's ready to go, man. He wants to compete. He told Max Crosby, tell the rest of your guys that we're getting after it. So I think fans should be at least excited about the press conference and kind of the energy that he showed and the enthusiasm.
Yeah, I think one thing that struck me most about Pete Carroll getting hired is how many of his former players really, love him and still support him. Like, you don't see that a lot in an NFL. Like, guys that played for the Seahawks are reposting that the Raiders hired him. Marshawn Lynch was in the building. It really kind of shows what kind of impact that Pete has on players that he's coached.
Yeah, it doesn't mean much, but I mean, like even the Seahawks had tweets saying congratulations to Pete. I never recall the last time I've seen a team congratulate a coach on another job somewhere else. So that was definitely a very positive guy, very well liked around the league. Mark Davis known him for a while. I think even Mark said that he knew him, but in the interviews, the energy was just something that he could really feel and kind of really enjoyed it and kind of became kind of contagious.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has that reputation as a cultural builder that's really beloved. So really, the only major instance of him having friction with a player that I can remember is the whole Russell Wilson fallout. But even then, last week on an appearance on the Pat McAfee show, I believe, Russell Wilson was giving him a lot of praise and, saying that he's going to do a great job if he does land another head coaching job. And we saw Max Crosby attended the press conference today. I'm pretty sure he was the only player that was there, but saw him talking to Pete Carroll for a while afterwards. And he gave Carroll some praise in recent weeks leading up to him getting hired as well. So it seems like he's on board with it. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to those traits that got Antonio Pierce the job, except for, Pete Carroll obviously has a lot more experience than Pierce did and has a long track record of success. And so, obviously Mark Davis wanted that culture builder and build that kind of bring that kind of coach into the program. And that's what they got in Pete Carroll.
Yeah, and one word that got thrown around a lot is compete. And it's not just in this press conference. It's been kind of Pete Carroll's theme since USC and maybe before that. Everything is about competition. Everything in practice is about competition. And, obviously a lot of coaches say stuff like that, but how it's implemented or whether it's really a main factor in your organization is questionable, but I think Pete knows how to do that. He knows how to create competition within the building and to really harness that to improve the team. What are your other impressions of the Spytek Carroll presser today?
I just thought you mentioned Pete. I think a lot of confidence. When you mentioned the track record, he knows about that. He mentioned the quarterback talk that wherever he's been, he's always had luck with good success with quarterbacks. He has no qualms about that being a success here. They'll figure it out. He talked about just kind of you mentioned the culture and building it, and kind of just he knows he can do it. He mentioned the timeline last time in Seattle was 3 years, and they're at the top, and he thinks a similar timeline exists now. He doesn't want to waste time, wants to get after it, and he thinks his team can be a factor before too long.
Yeah, I thought the amount of time or the number of times that Tom Brady got mentioned was pretty
Right.
telling. Pete Carroll kept bringing them up unprompted, and not just talking about him being involved in the hiring process, but also him being somebody that they plan on leaning on moving forward when it comes to making roster decisions and other elements of football operations. So Tom Brady wasn't there today. Didn't really expect for him to be there, given how this has gone, but seems like he's going to be pretty essential to the football operations moving forward.
Yeah, I wonder if the goal today wasn't to maybe downplay Tom's involvement because he still has the job at Fox and he wasn't there. But I think Pete just couldn't help himself. Pete was really excited about, hey, this guy's the greatest quarterback of all time. I can pick his brain. He loves to compete almost more than I do, if not more. And I can see what drives him, and he can be a guy who's input in the quarterback decision and other things. So I just think I'm not sure that was a script going in, like to talk about Tom Brady a lot, but I think Pete just couldn't help it. I think Pete was really excited about it and just think this is a rare chance to work with a guy who was the greatest player probably in the history of the league.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know how this Brady involvement will ultimately end up, but I mean, it's hard to deny that he has made an impact. Like, the whole thing with Ben Johnson taking the meeting and how much he got talked about today. I think people around the league really values his input or involvement in this organization, and then clearly it's probably part of the reason why Pete was very adamant about taking this job, or at least showing interest in this job.
Yeah, and
So
so Spytek also, that's definitely a Tom Brady guy, and so we definitely talked about how much influence Tom's had on him also. So just a guy who clearly has, like Pete said at one point, has his fingerprints all over this, and that'll be the kind of the case going forward.
yeah, and it kind of confirms that Tom Brady's going to have input in what the quarterback plan is, whether it's Russell Wilson or if they, I mean, it could be Wilson and they draft a quarterback too. What is there kind of an update on what they plan on doing at quarterback?
I mean, no, I'm not really gonna get that in the intro presser, but I guess a lot of the intangibles that they look for in quarterbacks, all the neck and above stuff, leadership, being competitive, being smart, making sound decisions. I think it was Spytek that said, it's not necessarily like having the most dynamic physical traits, and they seem to be alluding to Tom Brady there because we know that was never really his bag. He had a good arm, but it was mostly about, him having the mental edge over his opponents more than anything. And so gave us some general stuff, but they weren't going to get into any, specifics about their plan. Something that Pete said that was interesting, which I think we kind of talked about when we did our podcast after he got hired, is, he was saying as important as it is to find a quarterback, it's also about building up, the supporting cast around the quarterback. And I think there's plenty of work to be done on both sides of the ball when it comes to that, making sure that he has what he needs on offense, but also that you have a defense that you don't have to constantly bail out. And so, everything they said seemed to make sense to me.
Raider fans was, don't worry, we're going to find a quarterback. We're going to somehow free agency and draft look, we're going to get a guy. I know that was messaged last year also, and that's probably why those two guys aren't here anymore. It's a big part of it, and I think these guys know that. These guys are well aware of why this job was available. So I think they know that for Mark Davis and for the fans, and they need to find a guy. And I think they're definitely determined to find one this offseason.
Yeah. Shadir seems like he would get along with Pete Carroll, but I mean that's just getting a little far ahead of ourselves. But it seems like a natural fit to me.
It's a Tom Brady guy, so I mean to me that's huge.
Yeah, and a lot of mock drafts have Sanders falling to the Raiders at 6, so we'll see what happens. So what about the coaching search? Obviously, filling out the staff is going to be extremely important, especially the offensive coordinator hire. What did they say about the coaching search and where they stand?
Well, Pete said that they've, jumped into the process of reaching out to candidates and whatnot. And generally, when it comes to just the overall construction of the coaching staff, he says it's going to be a mixture of guys that he's familiar with, guys that he's never worked with before, and then people that are already on the staff. Ideally, for him, that's how he sees it coming together. Which is, it's pretty typical I would say for most assistant coaching staffs. In terms of the formal process, what we know so far, they haven't started offensive coordinator interviews, or at least it hasn't come out yet. But a defensive coordinator, they requested an interview with Carl Scott, who's the Seahawks defensive backs coach. He's been there since 2022, so he worked under Carroll for 2 seasons, and then this past season they were in the same building because Carroll was still with the Seahawks as a consultant, essentially. And then today they interviewed defensive line coach Rob Leonard, so an in-house candidate there. He was actually the first interview for the defensive coordinator spot, and so those are the 2 known people that have interviewed so far for a position. And just so people know, per NFL rules, the Rooney Rule does apply to coordinator spots, so they have to interview at least 2 diverse candidates for each one of those. And then quarterback coach, you have to interview at least 1 outside diverse candidate. So probably won't make any hires, at least for a couple of days, but they did get that process started for interviewing guys. So far, Carl Scott and Rob Leonard are the known defensive coordinator candidates.
What about offensive coordinator? Is there any mention about the offensive?
No, I mean, not yet. We'll see.
No. I mean, the biggest name, I guess, we hear is Daryl Bevel. And there's no really sexy guys out there that we're hearing about quite yet. But like Pete said, he's going to this is starting off. They're going to start the search. And I'm sure he talked to guys today after his press conference and kind of get a map of which direction they want to go in. So I think the next few days we'll get more of a sense of some of the guys' names will pop up and what they're looking at.
Yeah, one thing I do find interesting is the Bucks, who they've made 2 home run hires in a row at offensive coordinator with Dave Canales and Liam Cohen. And from what I've heard Jason Licht has really taken a major role in those hires. Like they're not just hiring guys that the coaches know and things like that. They're just casting a wide net. They like McVay guys, obviously. But the general manager is pretty involved in that. And I wonder if Spytek will kind of, obviously Todd Bowles is different from Pete Carroll. I think Bowles is just not a guy that's going to, he just seems like very egoless. I'm not saying Pete is has an ego, but I'm sure Pete would want a little bit more say in who his offensive coordinator is than Todd Bowles. But I wonder if Spytek will get involved at least to try to get him to interview some guys that maybe he wouldn't otherwise do. Yeah.
I mean, Pete said he wants to work with some guys that he's never worked with before. So, I mean, he said that on his own. So, he says it's going to be a mix of guys that he's worked with, guys that he's never worked with, and then guys already on the staff. So, but he did say we when he said, we was talking about the coaching staff. So maybe Spytek does have some involvement.
All right. So what about Mark Davis? I think you guys got an opportunity to talk to him. Anything from Mark Davis today?
Yeah, he was good. He talked about just the process, how he liked the other minority owners got really involved in the search firm. And he kind of said that, they had a guy in mind, and that was a guy, he didn't mention the name, but obviously Ben Johnson was the guy they had in mind. And once he went somewhere else, then Pete Carroll was the obvious guy. Like they knew, because Pete's, like you mentioned, the energy, he had the interview process, just kind of the winning history. So Pete definitely was there. I mean, he's the second choice ever, but I think, like we all reported, Ben Johnson was the first guy they were looking at. And so, we also asked him about, Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco. He hasn't talked since they were fired, and kind of what was the reasoning and what he was thinking about and why it was a tough decision. And he mentioned with Antonio that it was hard because the team never quit all year long. That made it very hard to fire him when the team responded like they did through adversity and through the injuries. And then with Telesco, he said that he drafted really, really well, but there's more to the job than that. So clearly he wasn't happy with some of the other things that happened on Tom's watch. And obviously the quarterback thing is a big one. So those are the reasons he gave for those guys not being here anymore.
Yeah, and he, it seemed to bother him a good amount that the other 3 teams in the division made the playoffs and the Raiders were the only one that didn't. So, I think that factored into it as well. He kind of hit on a little bit more about Tom Brady's involvement, which he's talked about it a few times now since Tom Brady brought into the team. But, he's I think it was before they hired Pierce, he was saying that he felt like the organization was missing sort of that senior voice in football operations. And he felt that's been a void in the franchise ever since Al Davis passed away back in 2011. And so that's basically what Tom Brady is filling in for, sort of that kind of president of football operations type of role. And so, I think I can't remember his exact quote. I think it was, one thing he knows is what he doesn't know. And so he knows that he's lacking in terms of football knowledge. And so that's part of the reason why he brought him in, him and Richard Seymour and some others to help guide him a little bit more. So doesn't guarantee that these hires are going to pan out, but at least his process was different. And he seems to be, pretty candid, and I thought, and, taking accountability for the way things have gone for the franchise. He also seemed to still be a little bit irritated by John Gruden having to resign after the emails. That he said he got his head chopped off or something like that. One of those, I think that was his line. So clearly, he got a guy a 10-year contract. He was planning on him being the head coach for the long haul. And so he thinks that sort of sparked this cycle of dysfunction that they've been in for the last few years. But, all that to say, he's confident that Carroll and Spytek are the guys that can put an end to that constant turnover.
Yeah, and like we mentioned a lot, I'll give Mark a ton of credit for just knowing where his weaknesses are, making this hire, and so far, I mean, not a hire, but getting Tom Brady involved, and it seems like it's paying off so far. Just need Tom Brady to do a Raiders chant. I just want to hear how that sounds like. Hopefully, it's a little better than Liam Cohen's Duval chant. If you haven't seen that,
That's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. All right. Before we get into questions, any more takeaways from the press conference?
Yeah, I mean, the topic of who's going to have the final say on roster decisions came up. I asked Pete Carroll that because for people that don't know, when he was with the Seahawks, he also had the title of vice president of football operations. And so that essentially meant that he had veto power over GM John Schneider when it came to roster moves. He does not have that title with the Raiders. And so I asked him, does that mean he's going to just defer to John Spytek? But he said it's going to be a collaborative process and they're going to be making all the decisions together. What exactly that looks like, I don't know. Like, if they disagree about something, like who gets the final say, like that still isn't all the way clear. So that was a little bit murky coming out of his press conference. But given the way Pete jumped out there and John didn't really answer that question, it kind of seems like it's Pete that probably will have the final say. So I thought that was a little bit interesting.
Sean was surprised by the answer, but yeah, we won't know for a while. But clearly, they're going to value each other's input. But yeah, I think the question of final say is still up in the air. I think definitely they're going to collaborate, like Pete said. But you can't do it 50-50. I mean, there's always going to be a 51 at some point. So yeah, John didn't answer the question. Why would he? But at some point, we'll see what the answer is down the line.
I would assume it's Spytek because
I mean,
he's been a high demand candidate for a little while now, and I can't imagine he would take a job knowing that Pete Carroll would have final say in these decisions, and Pete Carroll was essentially the second choice for the Raiders, and of course he'll have his say. I mean, there's these Pete Carroll preferences for the type of players he wants that have been very clear at his time as the Seahawk, but I would imagine it's Spytek, but I mean, we won't know for sure.
Especially when you're hired first. I mean, you were hired a couple of days before Pete Carroll was. So again, it's not a big deal at this point, and I'm sure if it's an issue, we'll hear about it down the road. But yeah, they're going to share the responsibility. I think they're both, Spytek mentioned he's a big fan of Pete Carroll's, loved his USC teams when he was growing up, and just is kind of really excited about working with him. I think, and Pete mentioned how he definitely knows about John's resume and thinks it's going to be a good team. So these guys just met recently. They've had I think it's 3 days of conversation. So it's all still kind of fluid, but they're definitely on the right frame of mind. They're definitely both attacking this with enthusiasm and confidence.
And I'm sure, it's going to be something that's interesting to see though moving forward. Like today, it doesn't necessarily matter, but as much as Tom Brady was mentioned, some people are going to speculate, does he have veto power, or is it Carroll, or is it Spytek? So that's probably going to be a discussion as we get deeper into the offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, it could be 33 Spytek, 33 Carroll, and 34 Brady.
Yeah, sounds messy if that's the case.
But Mark's got 10 there somewhere, so we got to do the other math. We got Mark in there somewhere, and we got Tom Delaney with the money stuff's got probably 2%. So it's a big math equation.
All right, well, we'll find out soon.
or we won't.
Yeah. Well, if a corner is the 6th pick of the draft, it might be Pete Carroll.
That's a good point. Yeah.
All right, let's get into questions. There's not a question, but shout out to Drip Raider for donating $20. Been following the pod since the Gruden days. We wanted to show some support. How do you guys feel about Carroll? Maybe
Oh,
the Raiders finally have a good hire at coach. What do you guys think?
there's a little question in there.
Yeah, that's a question. Go ahead. You go first, Tashan.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pete Carroll at this point in his career has proven himself to be a quality head coach. He's won a national championship, won a Super Bowl. It's really just a question of what the ceiling is. I think the floor is going to be a competitive, quality football team. It's just can they get to that mountaintop that he got to at USC and with the Seahawks. And we'll see. That depends on a lot of things. Figuring out an answer at quarterback, building out the rest of the roster, making the right hires at coordinators. So there's a lot of factors that are going to go into it. But I don't really doubt that Pete Carroll is a good head coach and a good hire. It's just a matter of what can he accomplish with the Raiders.
Yeah, I say it's hard to walk away from these kind of things. These big press conferences with the new hires. I can't see walking away like, oh, that guy sucks. This is that's a bad hire because it's all about positivity and enthusiasm, and these guys getting a chance to do it. I think maybe with Josh McDaniels, I questioned the whole not looking too much at the Denver Broncos stint. Like that was a red flag for me to kind of gloss over that one. But otherwise, again, these guys are here for a reason. They went through a process, and the positives are always stressed why this guy's the right guy. And with Pete, definitely it's the energy. It's definitely the winning history, the players we talked about backing him. So at one point today, Spytek kind of looked over and, hey, man, Pete's crushing this presser. And he really did. Pete crushed it. I mean, definitely, you couldn't ask for a better press conference out of Pete Carroll.
Yeah, like Sean mentioned, if the Raiders' floor is typically here with Carroll, it's here. But where the ceiling is, I think really depends on who his coordinator hires are. He's not going to call plays offensively and defensively, but we know he does all the things that a CEO coach does well. Game management, we'll talk about that at another time. But as far as culture and just the organization and things like that, he does all those things at a very high level. But with the Raiders, he's going to have an unlimited fun to use on coordinators. So hopefully he makes some inspired hires and not just Daryl Bivell or just guys he knows. But yeah,
that was a little tease you got there. You have concerns about his time management skills?
he's had issues with the Seahawks before.
Here we go.
Early on, he definitely had issues. I'm forgetting if things have gotten better towards the end of his Seahawks tenure, so I have to research that a little bit.
Too late, man. We put it out there. Now it's a question mark. God damn it. Day one, there's an issue. Game management.
Next question from Jorge Meza, who donated $5. Thank you, Jorge. Were y'all surprised at how transparent Pete was about TB12's involvement?
Yeah, we talked about that. I was, for sure. I thought they were going to downplay it more. I think Pete just couldn't help it. But clearly everyone knows Tom was heavily involved. I just think that because of his, the Fox thing, and he's going to be in the shadows. I thought one of the reasons you brought Pete in was to kind of be the voice and the face of this thing, to show that today. Obviously, he can do that. But so I was a little surprised how much Tom was mentioned.
Yeah, but I mean, either way, we all, we know what it is. You know what I mean? So it's like it's out there. So I guess he might as well embrace it.
It's like the Wizard of Oz, though, man. You don't talk about the Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is behind the curtain. You don't talk about the. That's supposed to be like, we know he's there, but we don't talk about it. But this is like everyone, hey, this guy's Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I wonder if Tom was watching, like, shut up, guys, shut up. Just too much.
Maybe.
All right, what is a CEO coach? I'll answer this because we used it a lot with AP, and we're going to use it a lot with Pete Carroll. CEO head coach is just a coach that doesn't call plays. He's in charge. He's more in charge of the organization and culture and all those things that that head coaches are in charge of. But it's basically just a coach that doesn't call plays and brings his value in other ways. All right. Christopher Kidd asks, but will the Raiders look at Russell Wilson? I imagine they are. I mean, they're looking for answers at quarterback, and it's not a guarantee that Wilson's going to sign with the Steelers again. There's a report that said that the Steelers would be happy with re-signing Wilson or Justin Fields. And Wilson lives in Vegas, right? And
I don't know about that part.
I'm sure he's got plenty of houses. I think his wife performs here a lot. I don't know if he lives here, but she might have I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah, he'll be an option. I just don't know if he's option one or option two. Like you said, the Steelers may want him back, and I'm sure at this point Russell's going to be worried about the money. Like last year, everyone got a discount, but this year there's no discounts, so I'm sure that'll be a factor with the Steelers. But yeah, I think there's definitely going to be. There's already a lot of talk about Russell and Pete and the history, and they patch things up and yada yada yada. So clearly, you make a list of guys who are possibly the Raiders quarterback in September. He's definitely one of the names on your list.
Yeah, I mean, like the options as we talked about on the free agent market aren't going to be that thrilling. So I mean, I think he's a solid one. You know, he's probably around average last year when you take all the games into account. Pretty familiar with Pete Carroll, obviously, and depends who they hired offense coordinator, but there might be some familiarity there as well. Yeah, shouts out to Chris for the question. He co-hosts the Seahawks Man to Man podcast with Michael Sean Dugard, so we'll probably be collaborating with them at some point, I'm sure, to talk about Pete Carroll.
Cool.
I was just on their pod talking about Clint Kubiak. But I think with Russell Wilson, I mean Chris could probably confirm this, or I think he drove Pete Carroll a little crazy with how he played too. So I don't know if he would welcome that experience back, especially with diminishing Russell Wilson. It just feels like such a short-term Band-Aid. Like maybe he could be good for a year or two, but even then, it's like the ceiling is not very high to me. So I mean, I'm sure he's on the radar, and it makes sense that he's on the radar, but I would not put Russell Wilson at the very near the top of my list if I were the Raiders.
I mean, I just don't know what like in terms of like the quality of options. Like, there's a bunch of Band-Aids, pretty much. Like, I don't know that there's a long-term solution that's going to hit the free agency market. Like, I guess Sam Darnold is the closest thing to that, but like, I don't know. You know, plus that's a lot of money that you're gonna have to give up to get a guy like that if the Vikings don't re-sign him to a deal. You know, via trade, maybe you could get into like the Geno Smith sweepstakes, but even, you know, he's like 35 now. He's not exactly a young guy. So if they don't draft a guy, like I feel like it's going to be more of the Band-Aid type of option. I think the goal there just has to be to get a better Band-Aid than Jimmy Garoppolo or Gardner Minshew.
All right. Raiders GA asks, do you believe the coach in waiting will be the OC or the DC? I mean, that's speculative. I think the coach in waiting thing could be enticing to throw in there, but who knows? I mean, I would guess it's probably going to be OC if you're looking to make a splash hire there.
I think if you're one of those guys, if you're an OC candidate or a DC candidate, it has to be on your mind. Like that's like, hey man, if I take this job and I do well, there's a decent chance I'm the head coach of this team in 3 or 4 years. So I think definitely something that has to be in your mind if you're one of the guys coming in to talk about that job.
Yeah, like if they, you know, because I don't know, I can't even tell you like who I guess Josh McCown is probably the hottest offensive coordinator name, and it looks like it might be hard to get him away from the Vikings. So if they can't get like a splashy name, maybe you take a shot on a young up and coming guy who's not really ready for his head coaching shot yet, and could be one to invest, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 years into this and potentially get their shot, whether it's with the Raiders or with another team, you know. So that's always part of the job. It's just a matter of, do people think this is a place where they can find success? And you know, that runs deeper than just Pete Carroll and Tom Brady and everything. Like, they have to see what is the plan at quarterback? Like, who can we realistically go get? How are we going to build up the rest of the offense? Like, you know, is there confidence out there that the Raiders can have a productive offense this upcoming season? Which I think is a fair question, because they haven't really had one since, I don't know, 2021 at this point.
All right, next question from True Raider. Is Tom Cable really coming back to coach the O-line, Olsen too?
They're the guys that could be in the mix. You know, they're still early on in the process, and part of it is going to be dictated by which direction they go in at offensive coordinator. But those are both familiar faces, not just to the Raiders, but also to Pete Carroll. Tom Cable was his offensive line coach for a long time with the Seahawks. Greg Olsen was a quarterback's coach there his last year with the Seahawks. So there's some familiarity there. But we'll see. You know, it's still early on. Some other names that have been in the mix. I think we mentioned Bevel earlier when it comes to potentially being in the mix for the offense coordinator job. But there's also Pete Carroll's sons. He mentioned one of them, Brennan Carroll, is the offense coordinator at the University of Washington. And then His other son, Nate Carroll, was most recently Carolina Panthers assistant coach. So those could be a couple other names that might be involved on the offensive staff in some capacity. But it's mostly speculation at this point because I think they're going to be focused on the coordinator spots first and then figure out the rest.
Yeah, a lot of babies. Like all these guys who are, I'm sure Pete's talking to, are also talking to other teams as well. So they're kind of weighing their different offers they have or possibilities. And I think that's why this takes a while to put this puzzle together because it's different puzzles, like across the league.
And from what I know, it seems like both guys are pretty well liked around the league. I mean, Tom Cable, I know the results haven't been there, but it seems like people around the league really respect Tom Cable, and people just seem to like Greg Olson a lot. He seems like a pretty good assistant. I mean, I wouldn't want him calling plays, but as an assistant coach, why not? All right, Matthew Greff, last question, asks, trenches and defense seem to be the priority, which I would agree is the best way to achieve success. With that said, do you think Fields could be a fit and potentially resemble a young Russ for Pete?
I guess on the first part, it's definitely, building up the trenches has been a priority for John Spytek in the front offices that he's worked in. This, winning Super Bowl 50 with the Broncos, they were really good in the trenches. Same thing with that Buccaneers team that won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. And so the Raiders, as we've discussed, they need a lot of help both on the offensive line and the defensive line. I think that, the defensive line was solid last year, but whether it's retaining some of the guys that are hitting free agency or making some additions there, I still think there's work to be done on that side of the ball as well. Russell Wilson, I mean, he's not Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, he's kind of in that same boat as Russell Wilson when it comes to kind of the mid-tier free agent options at quarterback. I thought he was okay to start the year with the Steelers. I know they ended up benching him for Wilson, but I don't think he was bad. They had a pretty good record when he was out there, and we saw he could, make some plays with his legs. He was still pretty limited in the pass game. It was probably the worst game that he had was the last start against the Raiders, where he was pretty much just spraying the ball all over the place there. But again, like it's not like there's a bunch of great options out there. So beggars can't be choosers when it comes to their pass forward at quarterback. So I don't think signing him to a 1-year prove-it deal or something like that would be a terrible move for the Raiders.
Showed some maturity last year, handling the whole thing well with Russell Wilson. He showed some flashes of not only obviously has the feet to make plays, but his arm made some plays as well. He's a little erratic, but I think you saw some improvement from where he was a couple of years ago. So it wouldn't be a terrible option as a bridge quarterback paired with somebody else, the draft pick or maybe this year or next year, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the playoff teams, like building your offensive line in this era of really small fronts and small defenses is so important. So it makes sense to prioritize building offensive line. I mean, you look at the Eagles, you look at the Chiefs, and you look at the Buffalo Bills. Those guys move people. So it's important to do. And obviously, Pete Carroll is a big proponent of running the ball and playing defense. And as far as Justin Fields, I mean, he's a guy that has made steady improvements every year he's been in the league. It's just very steady improvements. Like eventually you want to see a jump, but it's also hard to do when you're running through offensive coordinators and different teams. And he might be on a different team next year if you're suggesting he's going to be on the Raiders. So it's difficult to do. It's hard to see a player make that big of a jump this late in his career, but I mean, it's possible. Sam Darnold made a jump in the right environment, so I don't think it would be a bad shot to take a flyer on a young player with as much talent as Justin Fields. All right, last question from Jorge Meza. What are y'all Super Bowl picks?
At the beginning of the playoffs, I had the Chiefs over the Commanders, so I will stick with the Chiefs. I think they're getting better every week. The offense is obviously, yesterday was a season high in points, 32. I think Spags is clearly one of the better clutch game time defensive play callers we've seen in a long time, and that's a big reason why they're winning. And Chris Jones is a stud. No one talks about Chris Jones enough. So I think that every reason they won in the past is still there. So I have the Chiefs winning.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I think the Eagles probably have the more talented roster, but it's just pretty hard to pick against Mahomes and Andy Reid and Spags and the rest of that Chiefs group. They've been here before. They've won before. The Eagles are going to have revenge on their mind for sure, and I'm sure they'll be be fired up, but I think I have the Chiefs pulling out a close one.
Yeah, and if you look on paper, the Eagles are pretty. They have a lot of advantages against the Chiefs roster, but you could do that with the Chiefs roster almost in the last 2 years, and most of the playoff teams have a better roster than them. I mean, obviously they have their star powers, like you mentioned, but the Chiefs just find ways to win. Andy Reid is a great schemer, and they have the best quarterback in the league. So I would have to say the Chiefs are going to win this, but they would if they slow down Saquon Barkley, they'll win because Jalen Hurts is not going to beat some of the schemes that Spags is going to throw at him. I mean, they confused Josh Allen and on one of the biggest plays of the game. But the key is going to be slowing down Saquon Barkley, and really nobody has done that. But we'll see what Spags cook up for the run defense in 2 weeks. But yeah, I think most people are going to choose the Chiefs in the Super Bowl.
I feel like we let the Raider fans down there. I think they wanted our Eagles pick out of one of us, and we let them down. We all said Chiefs. So
No,
I apologize.
Vic, it's the reverse jinx, man.
Oh,
We all pick somebody to win.
See?
They lose.
We're jinxing the.
So you're welcome, Raider fans.
Yeah.
How about that? I take it back. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Like it.
So if this reverse jinx works, I want $100 tips from all the Raider fans on the next podcast.
We just want you guys to listen and enjoy. We don't need your money. So it's all love.
Kidding. I'm not kidding though. I'm just kidding. All right. The good electrifying press conference, new era in Raiders football. Pete Carroll seems like a right guy for the job, but we'll see. We'll talk to you guys soon. Hopefully they have some more updates on the coaching staff search, and once they do, we'll talk to you guys on the podcast. Thanks for joining us, and have a good week.
All right, y'all. Peace.
All right, hasta la vista.